director of Travelers Rest Connection. We are the nonprofit partner of Travelers Rest State Park. I always say it's kind of like the hardware and the software. Montana State Parks is the hardware. Fish, Wildlife Parks maintains the site, keeps the lights on, keeps the grounds looking great. They provide the basic structure here, and I get to have the fun of doing field trips and programs and coordinating with other partners in the community, making connections, hence Travelers Rest Connection. You are sitting in the visitor center for the only archaeologically verified campsite of the Lewis and Clark expedition. If you didn't know that, now you do. So we know from the journals where they camped all the way along the journey, but here we actually have archaeological evidence to prove it. And if you're interested in learning more about that, come on back and we'd be happy to take you on a tour. This place, we always say that Lewis and Clark did not camp here by accident. They followed ancient indigenous trails, and in fact they were being guided here by a Shoshone guide to stop in this place and rest up before making the arduous crossing of the Bitterroot Mountains into Idaho, what is now Idaho. Many tribes use this area, principally the Salish and Kalispel people. We are gathered on their homeland today, and I want to acknowledge that and to say that we continue to learn from Indigenous elders, artists, and organizations. We encourage you to learn from them and support them as well. And that is a little about Travelers Rest.
Great, thanks, Molly. Thank you. So Ryn Stafford is a playwright and poet who primarily works in the Twin Cities. After graduating NYU with a BFA in dramatic writing, Ryn completed 2 poetry residencies in Minneapolis and Brooklyn. She's excited about her current residency at Travelers Rest State Park and collaboration with Open Air. And I would just like to add, I'm so happy to see you all here tonight. The last couple of weeks, it's been so amazing meeting with Ryn. She has so much amazing information to share, and so let's bring her up. It's a real treat to have her speak tonight.
Thank you for the introduction. It would be great if it was on. There we go. Hello. Hi, I'm Ryn. It's nice to see everybody here tonight. Before I give my presentation, I just want to give a special thanks to Molly and Tano here at Travelers Rest. They were extremely knowledgeable. It's like anything I had a question for, they had an answer. And just sharing all their anecdotes really informed my research and my work. And I'd like to thank everyone here at Travelers Rest as well. Especially, there's a cool culture here of volunteers and people who are just really interested in the story and who come to add to it. And yeah, anyway. Do I have to?
Yeah, not really. It just needs to be scrolled. There you go.
All right, so I'm going to actually pass some of these around. So I was at the library, and as a researcher goes to the library, and there's a really big atlas book. They're all different, so if it's different from your neighbor, it's all good. And these are, what I'm passing out are maps made by William Clark. Some of them are, thank you, some of them are hand-drawn, and a lot looser, and some of them are much more detailed. Some of them have kind of anecdotal notes by the drawings. So I'm a playwright, and I came up with the idea of making monologues from the point of view of York. I know you've seen it. You've seen them all. Okay. So I came up with this idea of creating monologues from the point of view of York. York was enslaved by William Clark, and he accompanied for the expedition. There's not a lot about his interiority. You can find things, a little bit of speculation about where he was born. He shows up in the journals quite a few times, but there's not a lot of information about his thoughts and feelings. Like a lot of enslaved people of the time, he was illiterate. So my draw into this project was a curiosity about his interiority, his thoughts, his feelings, and I felt that my creative input was going to be in kind of making that from a playwright's perspective. Tentatively, it's going to be named York's 8 Islands, after 8 islands. They're now less islands. I'm not sure if there's how many. I think there may be like 4 or something. But at the time, they were islands off the Missouri River that William Clark named after York. At first, when I stumbled across this information, I was like, oh, that's interesting. He named islands after, someone who he thought was a slave. And then I learned that he also named some land after Seaman, the dog that belonged to Meriwether Lewis. So I don't know if it's as of note as I originally thought, but so I created these monologues. I intend for there to be 8 of them. I was really inspired by slave narratives, so they read a lot less like their journals, I would say, than they read as a slave narrative. They're a bit more interpersonal and a bit more detailed. And as I said, everything's pretty tentative, still in production, so I'm going to read some of the work that I have so far. They're soliloquies, and then embedded in them are kind of my stream of consciousness while I was conducting the research. All right, and then I have an audio recording of something that's not related to this project or research. It's something from this short film about ex-enslaved people talking about their experiences, and this is just audio from the beginning, and I thought it could kind of ground my work today.
Slaves, including 2 women you hear in this broadcast. Himself interviewed just before he died in 1979.
Falk was going on about how he believed in giving blacks the right to go to school, giving them the right to vote, giving them the right to go into anything they qualified for. And then he said he experienced an epiphany.
I was sitting out on a wagon tongue with this old black man, and was telling him what a different kind of white man I was. I remember him looking at me very sadly and kind of sweetly and condescending and said, you still got the disease, honey. I know you think you're cured, but you're not cured. You can't give me the right to be a human being. I'm born with that right. Now, you can keep me from having that. If you've got all the policemen and all the jobs on your side, you can deprive me of it. But you can't give it to me, because I was born with it just like you was. And my God, it had a profound effect on me. I was furious with him. But the more I reflected on it, the more profoundly it affected me. And I realized this was where it really was.
Okay, I'll just give a little summation of what he said. He said, so he was a kind of liberal white man of his time who believed that black people shouldn't be enslaved, that they should get the right to vote, that they should be equals to their white citizens. And he was talking to a black man who basically told him, his words were, you think you're cured, but you still have the disease. You can't give me the right to be a human being. I was born with that right. And this white man says that it had a profound effect on him, though he was furious when he was told it. Okay, so Act 1, soliloquy spoken by York. This is where his body tossed and turned in the dark, and I, his body servant, imagined our younger selves. There was a time when I hit him too hard. He wailed and keeled over. I came up to about his chest, and my blow landed in his gut. He cried. I told him not to, or we'd be discovered and I'd be in trouble. He reluctantly obeyed. In order to soothe him, I offered him my head. I brandished its top so that my wool stood above his face as he lay on the ground. He liked it. Wool has been or was, it was more often used in our childhoods, his name for my hair. He could run his fingers through it for long moments. He told me it looked like when the ladies at Mulberry Hill carded wool. With those hefty brushes, they'd run over the wool rhythmically, seeking to find an errant strand. They would then fixate on the strand in order to make it run like it should with the others, until it was no longer errant. He would run his fingers through my wool until it became huge and teased and disengaged. He'd find excuses to put his hands in it again to check for more errors. It soothed him so. We lie together under this canvas, hungry and nearly broken from exhaustion. He's fast, yet restlessly asleep. I am not and couldn't be tempted to offer his hand my hair, but if I did, should it calm him? Master Clark. End of soliloquy. Was William Clark married? Was William Clark a good person? Was William Clark a president? Was William Clark a captain? Was William Clark a slave owner? Was William Clark a rapist? Who was William Clark, and what is he accredited for? And why? Whatever he was, he looked composed. His portraits all have the same austerity. His mutton chops are the most suggestive thing I can find on his person, but even they seem to be agreeable. If there is such a myth of a savage native and African person, conversely, the myth must exist that the European person is not savage, that they're composed. I find this interesting, that someone could maintain beauty while partaking in genocide, that one's virtue could remain unturned in all their forcefulness, that someone like William Clark could command grace and slaves simultaneously. William Clark was a settler and an enslaver, born in Ladysmith, Virginia in 1770 to a slaveholding family. Typically credited as an explorer, governor, and cartographer, I want to set those labels aside for the purpose of examining the choices he made in order to help secure them in the first place. The logic here is that William Clark's status as an enslaver reigned supreme to my ability to reckon with his legacy and personhood, because the exploitation of Black and Native peoples was a resource to his fame, and not vice versa. Therefore, William Clark's status as an enslaver is not tertiary or secondary, it is primary. Act 2, soliloquy spoken by York. His temperature is fickle. His cheeks become red from cold air and laughter. In a temperature that was 15 degrees below zero, Clark ordered many of us to go on a buffalo run because our meat source is almost gone. I and others became frostbitten from the adventure. I shot a fat buffalo today with the gun my master handed me. Much of the crew was surprised to see my capable aim and skill, save for Master Clark. He and I underwent shooting practice as children. When I bring the buffalo to our site to be slaughtered, a poor farmer who has joined our cause compliments my game. The men are convivial and share in compliments of my kill. They put their hands on my shoulders, and I feel as if I have done something to inspire their awe. I'm watching my master watch me. He beams with pride. He brags to the men about my unordinariness. But when it is solely him and I, he is short, he is vain, he tells me I'm arrogant and lazy. He says, why don't you aid in the slaughter of your animal and quit smiling like a fool? Is it that my master is proud of me, or is he jealous of me? Is he thankful for my feats and help on this journey, or does he resent me all the same? Sometimes I suspect he'd rather we move slower and with more difficulty as a crew if it meant that the men would focus their attentions equally on our objectives and as well on his glory. He sweats excessively. His hair is grown too long now, far past his nape. Everything I see is wet and hot. He is so hungry for his name. He sweats for his prospect, Julia, and for his country. I am sweating only for my family and for my freedom. End of soliloquy. York did not choose to be a slave, and in respect of his decision and inherent autonomy, I will not refer to him as one. He was supposedly a cook. He was a swimmer, a huntsman, a death doula, a father, and a husband. These were roles, identities that he chose for himself. He was born in bondage, kidnapped and enslaved by the Clark family, probably around the same time of William Clark's birth. I don't know much about his person. The ability to write and record his inner thoughts and feelings was prevented from him. York is frequently credited with being a slave and a body servant. These are strange things to credit someone with, if you ask me. My choice to call Clark an enslaver and not to call York a slave is not for the purpose of besmirching the former and lionizing the latter. The purpose of calling William Clark an enslaver is to validate his choice to be one. The purpose of refraining from calling York a slave is to validate his rebellion against this role that was not chosen by himself. Act 3. Soliloquy spoken by York. These days I do not cling so heavily to my master's side. I have been doing trainings with the Indians here with Driard. Yesterday Driard went on horseback to catch a runaway. The white man was tied up and carried back to our site where he received lashings doled out by my master. It is bizarre to watch my master with a white man. The pregnant woman Sacagawea became ill and my master commanded me to tend to her with stewed herbs. It did not bother me. She is a slave like me. Her captor hit her in the face, and my master broke it up. Twice when a boat has capsized, she, with her big belly, has dove into the water to rescue the men and our items. I have done it as well. She sleeps in the captain's quarters with myself, Charbonneau, and Driard. These days I go hunting. I check in with my master and obey his commands, but it is not so bad because everybody else is doing it, and it is not quite like back home. Master Clark and I spend hours apart. Sometimes I help other men with their tasks. I am busy and very tired, but in better spirits than I found myself in the beginning of this trek. Act 4. Master Clark is less giving now that we have reached the Pacific. At Fort Clatsop, where we have voted to spend the winter, he has fallen ill and interrupts my plans to go fishing so that I might tend to him. All this time I have been waking up and tending to our canoes or hunting if the supply is low, and now that we are camped, he acts as if he doesn't comprehend where I might have gotten the notion of these tiny freedoms. He reminds me I am a slave. He reminds me he is my master. His temper becomes short. Weeks ago he ignored me, which delivered to me such bliss. We communicated about hunting to be done for the day, but that was sparse. There was no mention of these reminders that I am a slave. Everything is slower and easier, and now that it is so, my freedom is imposed upon. When things are dangerous, I am very free. When the party needs 100 reprieves, I am very free. When we are working toward one goal, I am free. When we wait for the opportunity of our homecoming, I am more a slave as each day comes. As they await their pay, I am more a slave. My master brings disgust to me. He is so vain. He is so proud for himself and none for others. He refuses to hear me speak at length. He delivers harangues about the virtue of obedience. He is ignorant. He is sick, and he farts and wails like someone who needs constant attention. He is smug to return home. I do not care for him to get better at all. End of soliloquies. In my research, I came to the conclusion that when Clark and York's relationship is discussed, people badly want to offer that their relationship was complex. They speak of their incredible intimacy and of their boyhood spent playing, and of how Clark was not as severe a master as his contemporaries. I understand their intentions in trying to convey how an enmeshment like the one shared by Clark and York produced a myriad of feelings for each of them. But those efforts don't exist in a vacuum either. We live in a landscape where celebrations of William Clark and his contemporaries are everywhere. Overwhelmingly to the American Republic, William Clark was a good person who did good things. His honor and contributions as a pioneer are defended with ease and frequency. I don't come to you to present the idea that William Clark was a bad man as a historical fact. Neither is it my aim for listeners to internalize bad feelings towards William Clark. I come with my deeming, Clark is a bad man, as a judgment I would share casually with my friends and family. I think it's important to note that while historical research went into this project, that it is not a historical or educational project, it is an artist project, and the artist agendas are present here. My wish is to stand before you today as a descendant of enslaved Africans, to look to William Clark's legacy, and offer the response, F all that. I think Black historians feel an obligation to, if not speak about William Clark with reverence, acknowledge in their language that it is commonplace that historians do. I get the sense that bearers of history feel they have to tread lightly in revealing emotional responses to slaveholders for fear of seeming biased. I want Black people to feel free enough to hold vitriol toward a character like William Clark without feeling like it's juvenile, because it's not. It's our right. I think all that is a credible engagement with history and a natural emotional response for us as descendants of enslaved people. In all honesty, as I read journals and accounts, I imagine that York hated William Clark. I imagine that he found him to be the most annoying person on the face of the planet. I want Black people to legitimize their lack of desire to deify, worship, credit, and neutralize William Clark. My initial draw to this project was to be able to create the interior for York. And while my objectives about historical language as it pertains to Clark overtook much of the project, I offer and dedicate this work for him. They're journals?
Yes.
I access most of them online. Yeah, there's an incredible database that Tano showed me through University of Nebraska. Yeah, it's amazing. You basically you can look up any day, and you can even edit like who you're seeing out of 5-6 journals. Yeah. So University of Nebraska has all of them.
So it sounds like they grew up together.
They did. Yeah, he was, York was born on, I forget the name of the plantation. They later moved to a place called Mulberry Plantation, but his father was enslaved to the Clark family as well. I think they had 3 generations.
So then was he freed at the end of the expedition?
Yes and no. He was freed about like 5 or 6 years after the expedition, but he was very adamant about receiving his freedom upon returning home. And they very much did have a very bitter stretch of time where York was, demanding his freedom, and Clark became more and more irritated with it. There's letters to his brother that he wrote to his brother where he says that he wishes sometimes to sell York to a severe master or sell him in a New Orleans market, which were notoriously vicious. So they had a very embittered, kind of ugly relationship at the end. He was eventually freed, like I said, I think 5 or 6 years after. He was set up with like a kind of like transportation business thing that William Clark and his nephew did. So he had horses and a little plot of land, and William Clark reports that he became lazy and died of cholera and died wishing to be a slave. So that's contested, obviously. But yeah, I think that's basically all that's known. There's also there's a speculation, or there's a report, I guess, that he went to the Crow tribe, and what it is technically is that the Crow said that a Black man lived with them in like the mid-1800s, like towards the end, what would have been the end of York's life, and he claimed to have been on the Lewis and Clark expedition, but there's no like historical evidence that it was York. So, which is interesting because Sacagawea kind of also has like a weird thing where there's like a confirmed date of death, and then there's also, so yeah, they have interesting parallels. Are there any other questions?
As you were researching this, did you find yourself like getting emotional about it and yourself like angry and upset as you're writing? And then what did you do to sort of relieve that anger? Did you just like let it go through you, or did you go for a walk? What did you do when you found yourself getting upset?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my desire to kind of let history affect us emotionally really anchored this project for me. I wanted to be an academic for a long time, and I was in Africana studies, so like I said, I was really familiar with slave narratives. I'd come across a lot of materials that, are jarring and disturbing, and academics, they have a reputation for being kind of stuffy and stoic, and so I think that there's an expectation to sort of be unemotional, and I don't see the point in that, because, history is story, it's anecdote, it's interpersonal, it's all of these things that, of course, you'd get emotional, and I don't find that as an objective to objection to understanding history. I find that as part of understanding history, and an essential part of understanding history. As far as kind of dealing with, or like coping with all of that, yeah, it's heavy, it's really heavy. It's weird, because I had a stomach for things at age like 7 that I don't now. Like, I remember this is unrelated, but I was, a lynching of a man, I was reading about it, and at a certain point I was just like, I can't read this right now. And Emmett Till's accuser, I'm forgetting her name, but she recently died, and so there's an obituary about her, and I was reading Emmett Till's Wikipedia, and there was a point where I couldn't venture on. So, yeah, I have my limits and my boundaries, but I think what can kind of be like a carrier for me is knowing that my ancestors went through like all these things that are really unimaginable to me and really remote to me, and I'm so grateful that I'm here, and I'm grateful that they lived and had enough hope to have children. I think that's a really radical act in a world that represses your right to exist. So yeah, like I said, there's so little about York that can kind of endear me to him, because I just, there's not a lot of interpersonal stuff about him out there. And even the stuff that does exist, it's like some level of suspicion can, I had. And I didn't want to like deify him, or there's a historian talking about how like for years he was like demonized, people like, there's like this image of him being this dancing buffoon because he was dancing for a Mandan tribe once, and that kind of got blown out of proportion. There are reports that he was like extra, sexually voracious on the expedition more than his peers. So all of these images of him kind of lampooned him into all of these stereotypes about black men, especially at the time. And as that became like cemented, then there was this move to undo all that, and then so he kind of became this hero. And I'm not really interested in making anyone a hero. It's more so about just looking at the literature that exists and being critical of it, I guess.
So I have to say, I think that opening imagery of these two small boys and Clark running his fingers through York's wool, right, his hair, it really, not deified, made it so real, like this is a real child, it felt real, whether it was imagined or not, and I just wanted to say, bravo, that was beautiful. I also wonder, and you sort of addressed this in your own notes to yourself, but in an era when there are state legislatures saying that you can't teach anything that makes children feel uncomfortable, like, I don't know, maybe, is playwriting the space because it's an art form instead of history, where we can make people feel uncomfortable? Is there a draw there?
I would actually advocate for history classes being that more so, because I have experiences of, because it's like, well, you know, who's gonna act that out? A bunch of kids who like maybe don't want to. I remember my brother was asked to be Rosa Parks in 5th grade and was like so scarred from it. So yeah, it was very silly. But no, I think history classes are the place for that. I mean, obviously, you know, children have thresholds, they're not the same as us. But the thing that I think is that if you don't have this discomfort that you can brush against with a bit of bravery in the classroom, it doesn't go away. And it's going to be something that you hold on to for the rest of your life. And in interactions about the subject matter or relating to the subject matter, you'll be kind of imprisoned by this tension and this anxiety that you won't let yourself be exposed to, you know? I think the thing with history is, and this nation's history is that, I mean, I don't want to make like a shallow universalism, but it's all our history. It's all our history. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be like a kumbaya, we all hold hands thing, but I think everyone's entitled to the truth. And I think, you know, certainly attempts at manipulating it, but even attempts at sugarcoating it or making it nicer, you know, they can have really disastrous consequences. So, yeah. Tom?
Was there anything that really like stuck out to you or something that really surprised you while getting into your research to sort of going into this mindset and creating
Absolutely. A lot of it came with my conversation with you the other day. Tano knows everything. And so does Molly. Yeah, there were so many cool stories. I spoke to Hassan Davis, who dramatized York's life in different places, and he really emphasized to me that, you know, there were other expeditions that had similar aims at the time, and one of the successes of this particular expedition was the different backgrounds, vantage points, perspectives, especially linguistically, geographically, that people had. And that's kind of really what led to their success, and one of the reasons that led to their success, at least. And learning about those specific stories was wild. Yeah, especially about the Nez Perce woman who, yeah, there's like a story they were really very hungry, like had eaten for days, and Lewis and some younger huntsmen went forward to try to find some food and bring back to everybody. And the Nez Perce were prepared. I'm like, Tano, you should just come up and tell a story. But the Nez Perce were prepared to kill them, right? Yeah, and then an elder who had made pretty much the same expedition, she had been kidnapped by a different tribe, and she had a baby, and she was sold to a trapper, I think, to a white trapper, and so she was like enslaved by this man, had his baby, and was like, I need to get out of here. She made the expedition from like Michigan to all the way to like Oregon-ish, which, yeah, alone. First with a baby, and then alone. You know, the baby passed away, unfortunately, on the journey, but it's like, it's mind-boggling. And anyway, so she said that along her journey that she was met with kindnesses by white people, and she like requested that they not kill them. And if they would have killed them, there's really small chance that they would have made it. Or like if they would have killed those people, small chance that Clark and everybody else would have made it. So yeah, just those stories, there's just so many of them. There's a lot that have to do with York as well, with some of the tribes feeling like endeared to him. Tano and I were talking about how maybe some of the stories are a little simplified, but there are accounts of tribes, because of York's black skin, having reverence for him because the color of his skin was associated with that. And like I said, Aspen and I were talking about how some of the, we're always suspicious, which is fine. It's good to be suspicious of the history we're told. But yeah, just things like that of just how many people it takes to do such a crazy, not for the Nez Perce woman, I guess. But you know, it's just like all of these people were so necessary and in some way, and or at least a lot of the people were necessary in some way, and you know, Lewis and Clark were the ones who received most fame, credibility. York wasn't paid. He was the only member who wasn't paid, other than the dog. And he wasn't accredited, you know, with, you know, being an explorer or even having gone on the expedition. He wasn't recognized on the governmental level. So,
just curious in your opinion.
yeah.
Of course, York didn't have a choice on the first trip. He had to go. And he experienced a lot of things different than what he would have if he had stayed home.
Yeah.
Do you think if the opportunity came up again to repeat the trip, do you think he would have gone?
That's an excellent question. There's also a question that people have posed, which is why did he go back in the first place? Like, why didn't he stay out west, where he was treated much more civilly by, you know, the natives that he encountered? The historian Hassan that I spoke with said that probably, and a lot of other people speculate that it's probably because of his family. He was very excited about getting to his wife and his children, and the biggest reason, he even said that he'd rather be sold to the plantation that his wife and children were on. If he couldn't get freedom, he just really wanted to be with his family. So people speculate he went on the expedition to gain his freedom so he could be with his family. But as far as going on the, like, if it were like Clark being like, hey, let's do this again, I don't think he would do it. I think at that point he knew that Clark wasn't going to give him his freedom. He was told that, you know, he wasn't going to get his freedom. And as far as the sort of like American colonial project at the time, it'd be hard to believe if York really had any investment in that.
So now what, Ryn? You know, I've had the privilege of kind of watching you navigate your way through this journey and kind of have new insights as you connect with more people and dive deeper into it. What has shifted for you? Where do you feel like you're still in alignment? Where does this lead to for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I need to do some like cartographical work because I was interested in actually like taking monologues and then plotting them on a map. And so having like a document that was like both a play and a map. So it's like York's telling a story and then it corresponds to somewhere in the expedition. And there's some of these maps where I can identify where they are, but a lot of them I can't just because I haven't had time to get to do that yet. So that is something that I'm interested in. I love maps too, so doing that work would be really cool to me. And yeah, I'm not like 100% gonna do like the 8 things to correspond the York State Islands name, but that's my plan so far. And yeah, like I said, my intentions were like really to create York's interiority. And while that's still my intention, I think in coming across the literature and like seeing a man being spoken of as a slave and then the other man not being spoken of as an enslaver is so gross to me. Especially because it's like, one is his choice, and he's not, you know, endowed with the name the title he chose for himself, and the other person, that wasn't his choice, and that's all he's credited for. It was being a slave, and obviously that word dehumanizes somebody, and I think that we legitimize the institution of slavery when I mean, it's not like you can never call anybody a slave, but it's just like I had a professor, Tao Li Goff, who discouraged us from calling people slaves and encouraged us to say enslaved. They were enslaved, and her logic was that, you know, these people had a lot of names for themselves. They called themselves mothers, they called themselves fathers, they called themselves, you know, blacksmiths, they called themselves all sorts of things. That obviously weren't, you know, artists that weren't legitimized because of the time that they were living in. So anyway, yeah, I am really passionate about the language behind, you know, just the language that we use to speak of all of this. It's, as a person who's a descendant of enslaved people, you know, it's not just like something from a dusty book that doesn't matter, you know. So I want to do the monologues and, you know, attach them to different maps. That's really interesting to me. But I also have this linguistic passion project. So I'm not sure how they'll coalesce or if they will, but yeah.
I thought what you read was interesting, the respiration between that interior exploration and then your own reflections. To me, there was a real strength and balance in it, and it brought it speculative into the past and also present in a reckoning, and there was a real power to me in the respiration between those two. So, yeah.
Okay.
So your time that you've been here this past month, and the information and the knowledge from people here that you've intake, what is your next step after this project that you've done? What are you going to be doing next after that?
Can you repeat that last part?
Yeah, of course. So the time that you were here, that you met with AmeriCorps, volunteers, the community here that has taken the information about with the information that you've gathered here in the presentation, what are you planning to do in the future after this project?
Like in regards to this project, or just in general?
Anything in general, or anything specific to work, things that you put in, what are your future projects that you have?
Yeah. Well, there's still, I mean, I've learned a lot, but there's still, I think, there's still some research I'd like to do, especially for making the monologues, or the soliloquies, because some of them are very specific about days, but some are an amalgamation of different days, and I want it to be a bit more like temporally accurate. But yeah, I don't know. I haven't done for my plays recently. I've been completely fiction, so I haven't done a nonfiction project in a long time. I love them. I used to love writing essays and stuff, so I've never written a historical play. But yeah, I'd like to work more on this. I'm not completely sure of what it will become, but something writerly, for sure. I can answer that, yeah.
Yeah, it was just more of a statement, I guess. I was just with some of my elders, and I was telling them about your talk tonight, and they said that they were happy that you have some rules and have a different perspective other than, that non-native narrative. And then they were also saying that that was where the sign for playoffs first came to be, so for sign language. I think that was where they first started making the sign playoffs.
Wait, when was?
When York came through, that was when that first sign language that was started to use for African.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. That's really cool.
It's kind of hard to follow that profound information, but I am a little curious if you could tell us more about your process. Like, as a playwright, when you're writing a play, are you thinking about where it's going to end up someday? Like, are you thinking about a story? You know what I mean? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Maybe just because of like self-doubt, I try not to imagine. I guess I like to be open to where it will end up and how it will end up. And thinking about, I mean, for this, I purely just thought about the audience is going to be the community of Travelers Rest. I knew that was the first round of it. But yeah, my process was pretty chaotic. It was like, because it's like, I've done something similar to this before, but I always forget. It's like, first you have to download a lot of information, and then you have to create something. And I expect myself to do those things simultaneously, but it's quite hard, at least for me. I kind of like to learn, and I've been learning as I've been creating, but there was like at least a week and a half where I was just learning, and then I was like, oh my gosh, like my fellow cohort members, Aspen and Cameron, are presenting, and like I had started, but I didn't have what I have now, because I was just like, I still have a lot more to learn. So, and then I had a studio visit with you, Kelly, where you were like, you've done a lot, and I was like, okay, great. But yeah, it's because like so much of this is story and real story. Towards the end, while I was being a bit more forgiving, not like trying to just like hit these books with 110%. I got to kind of sit with things for longer, and that definitely serviced what I was trying to do, and helped me see the me in it. You know, it's like, what do I think about all this? Which was something I wanted to share. And at the beginning of this, I didn't really necessarily know that I'd want to put my perspective into it so much.
So I have another question sort of about, and this is kind of related to, it's one of the beautiful things about open air and this sort of this place-based work is that there's a lot to learn or experience when you're in a new place, right? And I think Sage and Aspen, you probably experience this too as you're digging into the library and different resources. From our perspective here at Traveler's Rest too, we're always looking for, one of the reasons we like to be involved in this is we're looking for new ways to tell the story and the stories of the expedition and this place. And I keep coming back to how folks all along the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail interpret York, right? I mean, we had the great advantage of being able to work with Hassan Davis, and his work was, you know, it was very inspirational for us. But there's something, I know you're probably in your mind, you're writing this to be performed by a man, but I'm just saying, like, it was great hearing it in your voice. And I hope that whatever the finished project is, and I don't know if you've thought about this at all, it continues to incorporate your voice in that thought process behind everything, so that you don't lose that.
Thank you. That's a great compliment.